reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies. The person who never reads lives only one single life. George R.R. Martin. Reading is a wondrous spiritual journey. We sit still in our familiar body, yet our consciousness soars, traveling through countless destinies. Each time we turn a page, we are no longer ourselves. We may become a warrior amid the smoke of battle, a lover aching in a shattered romance, or a solitary mind wrestling with truth. The mind is stretched, challenged, and vividly reborn. A person who never reads is like living inside a sealed room whose walls are built only from their own narrow experiences. They know only one version of the world, the version that has unwittingly become their prison. Not because they lack the ability, but because they have never opened the door. That poverty lies not in material things, but in the depth of perception. Reading is the act of shattering the fixed self. It forces us to face opposing views, unfamiliar pains, and truths we have never imagined. Each word acts like delicate needles, stitching the gaps in the soul while opening the cracks that let the light of understanding slip through. The reader does not merely live more, they live more deeply. They carry the memories of 1,000 lives within them, and that is what makes them more compassionate, sharper, and freer in the way they see the world. Reading is not an escape from reality, but an expansion of it, turning one finite life into an infinite universe. 10 years from now, no one will care how quickly those books were published. The only thing that matters, the only thing people will remember, is how good they were. That is my main concern, and it will always be. George R.R. Martin. It pulls us out of the frantic rhythm of life, where people trade depth for speed and value for instant success. The obsession with being faster than others often springs from the fear of being forgotten. Yet the paradox is that this very haste creates fragile things easily erased by time. Quality carries a silent but lasting weight. It is like a stone polished over years, not loud in its making, but enduring long after every echo has faded. A book written with patience, with deep thought and genuine feeling, will not only be read, it will be lived alongside, remembered as part of another soul's inner world. That is the imprint time cannot easily erase. Placing long-term value above short-term recognition demands a rare mental discipline. The courage to slow down, to embrace solitude, even to be misunderstood in the present in exchange for lasting in the future. The speaker is not only talking about books, but about how they face life, not chasing fleeting lights, but building a quiet fire that never dies. Again, in a world where everything can be consumed and forgotten in the blink of an eye, that choice is not merely a strategy, it is a philosophy of living. A reminder that true value lies not in how fast you reach the destination, but in whether the footprints you leave are deep enough for time to pause and remember. The most wonderful thing about reading is that it expands your view of life. George R.R. Martin. The limits of perception. Each of us is born framed within our own frame of reference, family, environment, personal experiences like standing in a room with only one small window looking out at the world. And the danger is not that the room is narrow, but that we believe it is the whole of reality. Reading is the act of opening more windows. Each page is a shaft of light, each sentence a moment when the mind is pulled out of its familiar orbit. We begin to see other ways of living, pains we have never felt, dreams we never knew could exist. From then on, perception is no longer a monotonous straight line, but a multi-dimensional space where every viewpoint is illuminated and understood. This creates a powerful transformation. We judge less because we understand, fear less because we have lived through many situations, and feel less alone because we realize our emotions are not unique. Reading does not only give knowledge, it reshapes the way we feel the world and ourselves. A miracle occurs. When vision expands, life itself grows larger. Not because the world has changed, but because the way we see it has. What once seemed small becomes profound, what once seemed foreign becomes intimate. Reading, in the end, does not add to life, but makes life bloom like a flower already there, waiting only for light to touch it and unfold completely. Sometimes we all need to be gently mocked, so we stop taking ourselves too seriously. George R.R. Martin. There are moments in life when we need to be laughed at, not to be diminished, but to be pulled back to the ground where the ego no longer swells like a balloon about to burst. This dialogue, seen through the eyes of a psychological observer, is a mirror reflecting the disease of taking ourselves too seriously, a subtle affliction almost everyone has suffered. When people are too busy protecting their image, they turn themselves into fragile monuments. A single light jab is enough to shake the entire carefully built structure of self-importance. Like opening a window in a stifling room, the incoming breeze may be cold and make us shiver, yet it is exactly what lets us breathe again. When we are teased or placed in absurd situations, we are forced to see ourselves from another angle, less solemn, less tragic, and therefore freer. In truth, the bigger the ego, the more fragile it becomes. It needs constant protection, recognition, and pampering. But a laugh, especially one aimed at ourselves, has the power to shatter that vicious cycle. It reveals the absurdity of the overly serious roles we assign ourselves, as if every eye in the world were fixed upon us. While in reality, the world keeps turning utterly indifferent to the grand personal tragedies we imagine. Learning to accept mockery is learning to let go. Letting go of the need to always be right, always respected, always the center. Then we do not become smaller. We become more flexible and more open. A soul that can laugh at itself is a soul no longer trapped in the cage of pride. And paradoxically, only then do we touch a profound freedom. Freedom from ourselves. You are not trapped where you live unless you decide to be. Wayne W. Dyer. People often build invisible walls around themselves and call them reality. This city is cramped. That job is confining. This life is already written. But in the end, most of those limits lie not in geography, but in the architecture of the mind, a system of beliefs repeated until they harden into truth. You are not trapped where you live unless you choose to be, is a piercing revelation. It strips away the illusion that we equate the familiar with the inevitable. We stay not because we cannot leave, but because of the fear of uncertainty, failure, and facing a different version of ourselves. And so, to soothe that anxiety, we tell ourselves a comforting story. I have no choice. Yet deep down, it is a choice. The choice to remain in the comfort zone, cramped but predictable. A bird that has grown used to its cage. The wings are still there, the sky is still wide, but the idea of freedom has been replaced by the habit of captivity. When the door opens, it does not fly, not because it cannot, but because it no longer believes it can. And that belief is the real lock. The fascinating part is that once we realize we have the right to choose, we do not have to leave immediately. Freedom lies not in the act of moving, but in the awareness that we can move. Then staying is no longer endurance, but a conscious decision. And this quiet shift from passive to active gives us the feeling of mastering our own life, no matter where we stand. We step out of the thinking that once held us captive, because sometimes the place we most need to escape is not a city, but an outdated version of ourselves. Earthly paradise is a choice you must make, not a place you must find. Wayne W. Dyer. People often live like eternal pilgrims, believing that if they just go a little farther or achieve a little more, they will reach a perfect state, an earthly paradise where everything feels right. But the irony is that they carry their old ways of seeing with them, so no matter where they stand, they still view the world through the same lacking eyes. Earthly paradise is a choice, is a radical declaration. It moves power from the outside world back to the inner self. It declares that life's experience is not the result of circumstances, but the product of how we interpret them. Two people can stand in the same place. One sees confinement, the other sees peace. The difference lies not in space, but in the meaning each person assigns to reality. It is a call to abandon the victim role, a role dangerously easy to cling to because it excuses us from responsibility. When we believe paradise must be found, we hand the power to decide our happiness to things beyond our control. Perfect conditions, perfect people, the perfect moment. But once we understand it is a choice, we face a harder truth. If we do not see paradise, perhaps it is not because it does not exist, but because we have not yet chosen to see it. This does not mean denying pain or painting reality in rosy colors. On the contrary, it demands deep awareness, seeing clearly what is imperfect, yet refusing to let it alone define our experience. It is like standing in a garden still overgrown with weeds, yet choosing to notice the flowers in bloom, not because they outnumber the weeds, but because we decide to give them meaning. Earthly paradise is not a location, but a state of awareness, a way of being present. It does not wait at the end of the journey. It appears in the way we walk, and paradoxically, only when we stop searching for it as a place do we begin to live inside it as an experience. You will never have a cup of tea big enough or a book long enough to satisfy me, C.S. Lewis. A cup of tea is more than a drink. It is a symbol of comfort, of pausing, of the feeling that this is enough. And a book is knowledge, story, the endless expansion of the inner world. Yet the problem is that no matter how much we pour in, the mind still whispers, not yet enough. The postponement of satisfaction. People do not truly seek satisfaction, they seek the feeling of approaching it. A larger cup promises a few more minutes of warmth. A longer book promises a few more hours of escape. But once we have it, the joy evaporates like steam, leaving behind the same familiar emptiness that drives us to search again. Like someone smiling at their own greed, we realize the problem is not the size of the cup or the length of the book, but the very structure of desire itself. The human mind is not built to stay satisfied for long. It is always moving, always wanting more, always expanding. It opens a gentler way of seeing ourselves. We can keep sipping tea and turning pages not to fill a void, but simply to enjoy the act itself. Then the cup does not need to be bigger, the book does not need to be longer, we only need to be more fully present in every sip and every page. And perhaps that never enough stops being a complaint and becomes a gentle reminder. Life is not a problem to solve, but an experience to savor, sip by sip, even knowing there will never be a perfect ending. The purpose of art is to wash the dust of everyday life from our souls. Pablo Picasso. The human soul is like a room forever covered in the dust of daily life, the repeating worries, meaningless conversations, silent pressures that settle like a thin but stubborn fog. We live, yet sometimes we live worn down, emotions dulled, beauty no longer able to stir us. Then art appears not as luxury, but as a cleansing ritual. Washing the dust does not mean erasing reality, but renewing the way we see it. A painting, a melody, or a page of writing can make us pause, and in that instant, the familiar current of thought is interrupted. The mind, forever chasing efficiency and purpose, is suddenly allowed simply to feel. Like sudden rain on a dusty street, art does not change the structure of the world, but makes the world clearer in our eyes. Art works as a mechanism of release. It gives suppressed emotions unnamed sorrow, joy not yet opened a way out. When a melody makes our heart tremble, or a sentence holds our gaze longer than usual, it is not merely appreciation, it is recognition. We see ourselves in it, and in being seen, something inside us is healed. But perhaps the most important gift is this: art reminds us that we can still feel. In a world where people easily become reactive machines, answering messages, finishing tasks, chasing goals, the ability to resonate becomes a rare kind of freedom. Art does not simplify life, but it returns depth to us, a space where we do not merely exist, but truly live. The purpose of art is not to help us flee reality, but to bring us back to it with a soul that has been cleansed, softer, and ready to see beauty even in the most ordinary things. And in that moment, we understand the dust never fully disappears, but we have learned not to let it hide the light inside us. Life becomes easier when you learn to accept the apology you have never received. Robert Brault. We live like emotional accountants, carefully logging every word, every wound, silently waiting for a refund called an apology. But the irony is that many will never pay that debt, not because they cannot, but because they do not see it or lack the courage to see it. And so we remain stuck, not in the past itself, but in the hope that the past will be repaired. Accepting the apology you have never received is an act of quiet inner rebellion. It shatters the old logic that healing must come from outside. Instead of waiting for someone else to admit their mistake, we give ourselves closure. This is not naive forgiveness nor denial of the hurt. It is a conscious choice to stop letting another person's actions control our inner state. When we depend on an apology, we hand the key to our emotions to someone else. But when we accept the apology that never came, we take back the right to define our own experience. It is like lifting an anchor from the boat. The sea remains, the waves may still rise, but at least we are no longer fixed at an old point of pain. Of course, This is not easy. Deep inside, the ego still wants vindication, still wants to see the other person bow. Yet that very longing is the rope that keeps the bond alive. When we release it, not because the other deserves forgiveness, but because we deserve peace, a new space opens where the past no longer has the right to write the present. And perhaps easier does not mean a life without wounds, but a state in which we no longer carry conversations that never happened. We move forward not because everything is resolved, but because we have stopped demanding that it be resolved our way. In that quiet letting go lies a freedom so gentle yet deep enough to change the entire way we live. Then one day you will be old enough to start reading fairy tales again. C.S. Lewis. People are truly grown only when they have the courage to return to what they once called childish. Fairy tales, at first glance, are worlds of simple magic and neatly arranged happy endings, something adults, with their realistic and slightly skeptical gaze, often set aside like an old toy. Yet, in the very act of returning, a deeper layer of meaning is revealed. As children, we read them with innocent faith that good always triumphs and magic is real. As adults, we leave them behind, not because they are false, but because we have learned to view the world through a more complex lens, where good does not always win and magic rarely appears. Yet with time, if we mature enough, we realize fairy tales were never only about the outer world. They are subtle metaphors for the human heart about hope, loss, and the journey through our own darkness. Old enough to read them again, therefore means stepping into a new level of awareness. This time, we do not read to believe, but to understand. We see dragons not merely as monsters, but as fears, dark forests not merely as places, but as being lost, and happy endings not as simplification, but as a courageous affirmation that hope still has a place, even when reality offers no guarantee. A truly mature person is not one who discards all dreaming, but one who knows how to weave it into life without being deceived by it. They can look straight at the world's complexity, yet still choose to keep a part of faith, not out of naivete, but because without it the soul would grow brittle. It is the rediscovery of the ability to be moved by simple things. And paradoxically, only when we are old enough to understand that the world is not always beautiful do we become grown enough to cherish the beauty we once carelessly left behind.